You are afraid of losing your job. That feels like the biggest financial risk in your life. But the real risk might be the lifestyle you cannot reduce without pain. Your salary may increase every year. That feels like progress over a long-term horizon. Yet your fixed costs often rise faster than your income without you noticing. Many young professionals feel safe because they are still employed. The paycheck creates a sense of stability against volatility. But stability built on locked commitments is often fragile. We rarely measure how flexible our lives are. We mostly measure how much we earn. That framing hides the real source of risk over time. This is the margin. We break down the uncomfortable math behind work, wages, and modern cost of living. In the next few minutes, you may see why your stability feels solid but reacts poorly to drawdown. As an entry to mid-level professional, you do not feel poor. You just feel tired most of the time, and slightly anxious every month before your paycheck resets the cycle. Your salary covers rent, it covers the car payment, it covers survival within your current time horizon. The problem is that enough is not the same as secure. Enough only means you have not fallen yet. It does not mean you can absorb volatility or a drawdown. Most young professionals spend 60 to 70% of their income on fixed costs. That number is not extreme. It is a realistic average in Tier 1 cities. Rent or a mortgage often absorbs a third of your income. Transportation and insurance quietly add another layer. Student loans and subscriptions sit in the background, compounding over time. All of this looks normal. Everyone around you is doing the same thing. Normal behavior makes structural risk feel invisible. We do not feel afraid while the paycheck keeps arriving. We only panic when the number stops moving. Yet the rigidity in our expense structure has been there for years. The illusion of security often comes from routine. Routine feels stable over a long-term horizon. But routine is not the same as flexibility. You feel stable because nothing has shaken your system yet. That is not the same as being resilient. Stability without stress testing is simply unproven. Reduce your income by 20%, not to 0, just 20. Notice how a small drop already changes your sense of risk. Your rent does not fall with it. Your car loan continues on schedule. Insurance still pulls its automatic debit like nothing happened. The pressure moves to the flexible 30%. That part was supposed to build savings and long-term compounding. Now it is forced to absorb volatility instead. Panic does not start with unemployment. It starts with losing room to breathe. A narrow margin makes small drawdowns feel personal. We think we depend on our jobs. In reality, we depend on the lifestyle built around that income. The risk lives inside that structure. The higher the fixed cost, the lower the tolerance for volatility. Modern life runs on subscriptions and long commitments. That combination shortens your time horizon without you noticing. We celebrate salary increases. We rarely measure the cost commitments that rise with them. Income and obligation often compound together. Every upgrade feels like progress, but not every upgrade improves long-term security. Some only increase hidden risk exposure. When life cannot shrink, small volatility feels like crisis. That is modern financial fragility, and it often lives in educated middle-class households. Lifestyle is not just a number on a spreadsheet. It becomes a social identity that signals who we are, and identities are much harder to downgrade than expenses. A certain apartment feels like leveling up. A certain car feels like proof of progress. A certain neighborhood feels like safety with a higher price tag. When income drops, we still feel like the same person. But when lifestyle drops, it feels like a personal drawdown. The pain is psychological volatility, not just financial math. We often choose overtime over downsizing. We trade time horizon for short-term image stability. It feels rational, but it is mostly emotional risk management. Humans protect what they already own, even when the numbers suggest lower long-term efficiency. Psychology often overrides compounding logic. Young professionals compare sideways, not upward. We measure ourselves against coworkers, not billionaires. Horizontal comparison quietly increases perceived risk. When everyone upgrades, standing still feels like failure, but sometimes stagnation is a long-term volatility strategy. It just does not look impressive on social media. We fear looking lower status more than losing stability. Social framing shapes our perception of risk. The image matters more than the balance sheet. In the end, we are not just protecting stability. We are protecting a story about who we think we are. And that narrative carries its own long-term risk. Modern stability looks clean from the outside. The apartment is neat, the salary arrives on time, and the calendar is full. But beneath that surface, too many commitments are locked in place. The higher your fixed cost ratio, the lower your tolerance for volatility. This is not a mindset issue. It is basic arithmetic applied to your time horizon. If 70% of your income cannot move, only 30% can absorb a drawdown. That margin becomes your entire flexibility, and 30% disappears faster than most people expect. Many professionals are not poor. They are simply structurally inflexible, and inflexibility increases risk over the long term. A high salary without margin is just high pressure. It looks impressive on paper. But under financial stress, pressure accelerates drawdown. The modern system rewards constant upgrading. Consumption keeps the machine moving through compounding demand, but the individual absorbs the long-term obligation. The bigger your long-term commitments, the harder it becomes to take bold career risks. Your time horizon shortens. Optionality quietly shrinks. Many people stay in jobs they no longer enjoy, not because they lack skill, but because volatility feels too expensive. This is where lifestyle turns into risk. It reduces your available choices during a drawdown, and choice is the most real form of long-term wealth. The solution is not extreme minimalism. It is also not rejecting ambition or growth. The solution is redesigning the structure of your financial life. Your apartment is not your identity. Your car is not proof of competence. Fixed expenses should not define who you are. Start viewing fixed cost as a strategic variable. It is not a trophy of success. It is a lever that affects your risk and volatility. Before upgrading your life, run a simple simulation. What happens if income drops 20% for 6 months? If the answer is panic, the timing may not be right. Build flexibility before expansion. Save first, commit later. Boring discipline protects your long-term time horizon. Banks calculate your capacity to pay. They do not calculate your comfort during volatility. Approval is not the same as sustainability. Leave room to shrink without shame. Optionality means you can adjust during a drawdown. That flexibility reduces long-term risk. Wealthy people focus on assets. Smart professionals focus on flexibility. Flexibility compounds quietly over time. The goal is not to look upgraded. The goal is to keep moving during volatility. Real security means surviving the next change. We've been trained to measure success by lifestyle upgrades, bigger apartment, newer car, better neighborhood. But almost no one measures success by how well they can survive volatility. A higher income feels like progress. Lower risk is rarely celebrated. Yet managing risk over a long-term time horizon is often the more adult move. If your life can shrink by 20% without panic, that's strength. It means your margin can absorb a drawdown. That stability rarely gets posted online. Margin is not just spare cash. It is breathing room in your monthly structure. Without it, even small volatility feels personal. Many people chase promotions just to cover rising fixed costs. Fewer people reduce fixed costs to open options. The direction of effort changes everything. Financial freedom is often imagined as a huge number. In reality, it can look like small, consistent flexibility. Flexibility compounds quietly over time. You don't need to downgrade your life dramatically. You just need to avoid being structurally locked in. That is a long-term strategy, not a short-term sacrifice. True stability rarely comes from luck. It comes from intentional design. And design is a skill that improves with awareness. Lifestyle should follow your values. It should not pressure your values into submission. That is what healthy control looks like. You are not lazy. The modern cost structure is simply expensive to maintain over a long time horizon. Most burnout is friction between income growth and structural risk. A raise does not automatically reduce risk. If every salary increase comes with a bigger apartment or car payment, volatility stays the same. That is the financial treadmill few people question. We live in a high fixed cost era. Housing, healthcare, and education have compounded faster than general inflation. That shifts your long-term margin before you even notice. Young professionals absorb this pressure first. They enter the system when prices are already elevated and time horizons feel long. This is generational risk, not personal failure. Traditional advice assumed lower volatility and cheaper entry points. Today, working harder without structural awareness can increase drawdown risk. Strategy now requires design, not just effort. This season is not about getting rich quickly. It is about reducing fragility over a realistic time horizon. Stability compounds quietly. We will talk about ratios, pressure, and margin. Not hype, not instant outcomes, just math applied to real life. Understanding risk changes behavior more than motivation. When you understand the system, uncertainty feels different. Volatility becomes something to plan for, not fear. Calm is an underrated asset in long-term compounding. If you feel exhausted but still ambitious, that tension is real. Maybe your ambition is fine, but your structure increases risk? Sometimes leveling up means redesigning the base. You cannot control the economy or market volatility, but you can control the structure of your fixed costs and your time horizon. That design choice quietly determines how much risk you actually carry. Jobs change and industries shift over time. Income can fluctuate, and drawdowns happen more often than we expect. Flexibility is what keeps you standing when volatility shows up. Your lifestyle is not the enemy. It becomes risky only when it removes your margin of safety. When every dollar is committed, volatility feels personal. If this made you rethink your cost structure, that is a good sign. Awareness changes how you measure long-term stability and compounding progress. Seeing the system clearly is the first real upgrade. This is the margin. We are not here for hype, only for clear thinking about risk and time. If you want a calmer relationship with money, we will continue next episode.